The file begins. The first report of John Travolta's death came not with a bang, but with a sterile push notification in the fall of 2025. A digital tombstone erected in seconds. It spread like a contagion through the network, a premature obituary for a man who was still breathing. The public reaction was a strange cocktail of disbelief and a chilling, almost immediate acceptance. It felt plausible. That is the anatomy of his fall. The lie was quickly disproven. But the question remained, hanging in the air like stale cigar smoke. What part of him had already died to make the news so believable? Pause. The silence from his camp was more telling than any press release. The man was alive, but the verdict was in. Exile. Not from Hollywood, but from the life he had built. His personal airport in Florida, once a monument to limitless freedom and staggering wealth, became something else. A concrete testament to his isolation. The Boeing 707, a chariot of the sky that once ferried him to premieres and parties, now sits. A silent metal whale beached on a private shore. He built a runway to connect with the world. Now it serves only as a reminder of how far away the world has become. Friends became acquaintances. The house, a sprawling complex designed for a king, grew quieter. The echoes grew louder. This wasn't just loneliness. Pause. This was a posthumous audit of a life, conducted while the subject was still present to witness the bleak inventory. This was a posthumous audit of a life, conducted while the subject was still present to witness the bleak inventory. But every ledger has a first entry. Before the private runways and the silent hangars, there was just a boy from New Jersey. A hunger so sharp it could cut glass. The world first saw it encased in a white polyester suit. Saturday Night Fever wasn't a film. It was a cultural detonation, and Pa's Travolta was ground zero. His success smelled of cheap cologne and the concrete floors of a Brooklyn disco. He didn't just play a character, he mainlined a generation's desperation for something more. Pause. He became their king, and the throne was a sticky dance floor under a spinning mirror ball. This was the genesis of the empire. An empire built on swagger and a perfect chin. But the swagger was borrowed from a script. The chin was his, but the soul behind it was already being mortgaged. For every ounce of glamour, there was a pound of destitution he was running from. He sold the world a fantasy of escape. The price was that he could never truly escape himself. It was his first fatal error, believing the costume was armor. Armor, however, is useless against the betrayals that come from within, from the blood. He had sought a system, a science of the mind, to fortify his world against the chaos of his youth. It was a futile gesture. The universe does not negotiate. The first invoice for his spectacular life arrived on a Bahamian morning in 2009. The cost was absolute. A name. Pause. Jet. The death of a child is not a chapter in a life, it is the end of the book. The rest is just a bleak epilogue written by a ghost. The fortress of belief he had constructed around his family was breached. The silence that followed was not one of dignity. It was the sound of a faith cracking under pressure. Then came the second blow, the final demolition. Pause. Kelly Preston, his anchor, the co-star in the one production that truly mattered. Her passing wasn't just another loss. It was a verdict, a confirmation of the curse. The inventory of his life was no longer about jets and box office receipts. It was an anatomy of pain, a list of ghosts. The man who taught the world to dance was now left learning the slow, solitary steps of grief, a dance with no partner, pause, and no end. The grief was a physical space, so he built another. A kingdom of asphalt and hangars in the Florida heat, Jumbo Lair. Not just a home with a runway. It was a concrete declaration of sovereignty, a place where the rules of the ground did not apply, where a man could taxi a Boeing 707 to his own front door. This was not a hobby. It was in the architecture of escape, a fortress against the random cruelty of the world below. For a time it worked. The cockpit was his confessional, the sky his absolution. But the universe has a bleak sense of irony. The very machine built for escape became the stage for his next public humiliation. A near-fatal mistake, not in the distant past, but recent. A reminder that gravity, like grief, always wins. The sanctuary became a potential tomb. The runway, a direct path not to freedom, but to another pause reckoning. An audit of the incident reveals a familiar narrative: pilot error, a miscalculation. The official report is a sterile document, scrubbed clean of poetry or judgment. But the real evidence isn't in the paperwork. It's in the pattern, the anatomy of his choices. This wasn't a singular error. It was the logical conclusion of a life spent believing his own legend. The fatal mistake wasn't a wrong button pushed in the cockpit. The fatal mistake was believing he could outfly the ghosts. That the laws of physics, like Hollywood critics, could be charmed or ignored. The overlooked detail is the arrogance, the quiet, accumulating hubris of a man who conquered the world and thought he could conquer the sky too. The near crash was a verdict on that arrogance, a warning shot fired across the bow of his private kingdom. Pause. He landed the plane. He walked away. But a part of him remained in that silent, powerless cockpit, 30,000 feet above the earth. A shard of his invincibility, left behind in the cold, unforgiving air. The legal filings were a different kind of turbulence. Unseen, unforgiving. They arrived not as near misses in the sky, but as manila envelopes slid under hotel room doors. An inventory of sins, real and imagined. The public remembers the whispers, the accusations from masseurs that materialize from the steam of a back room, only to evaporate when challenged. But the damage was done. The verdict was rendered in the court of public opinion, long before any judge saw a file. Pause. The cost wasn't in the settlements. It was in the slow septic poisoning of his myth. Each headline, each lurid detail chipped away at the icon, revealing a man who seemed to attract the bizarre and the predatory. The recent farcical lawsuit involving the Presley family wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical endpoint. When you bleed vulnerability, you attract sharks. His grief became a commodity, his fame a target. This is the anatomy of his isolation. He built a fortress of fame and fortune, only to find the real enemy was already inside the walls, filing paperwork. But the lawsuits were just symptoms. The fever dream of a compromised immune system. The real disease, the true fatal mistake, was the cure he chose. He sought shelter from the storm of loss and found it in a bunker lined with doctrine. The Church of Scientology. It offered him a language for his grief, a framework for the unthinkable. It helped him survive the death of his son. Pause, and in exchange, it took everything else. The mistake was not the choice to join. It was the slow, imperceptible surrender of his own judgment. A lifetime of auditing sessions, like a post-mortem on a living soul, carving away the parts that didn't fit their narrative. He traded his own reality for a shared delusion. Now they say he is off course, a member in good standing who no longer attends. This isn't a rebellion. It's the quiet panic of a man realizing the ship he's on is not a rescue vessel, but a ghost ship, sailing an endless, circular route. The fatal mistake was believing a contract could replace a soul. The shadow of the bunker is long. It stretches across decades, obscuring the man he might have been. And the consequences of stepping off that path are not dramatic. They are mundane. They are suffocating. The career is no longer a monument. It is a series of odd jobs. An AI-themed thriller about a killer chauffeur bot. A survival film about attacking orcas. These are not roles. They are distractions. The frantic activity of a man trying to fill a silence that has grown into a roar. The bizarre lawsuits dismissed as fiction are merely symptoms. Cracks in the foundation of a carefully constructed reality, revealing the strange wiring beneath. He is no longer protected by the fortress he helped build. Pause. He is simply a former asset. The anatomy of this fall is not a sudden crash. It is the slow, grinding erosion of relevance, leaving behind the hollow shell of a brand name attached to projects that feel like echoes from a cheaper, darker dimension. So comes the final audit, the bitter testament of a man who danced his way into our collective memory and then spent a lifetime trying to escape the music. He was never the confident swagger of Tony Manero or the cool detachment of Vincent Vega. Those were costumes. The real John Travolta was the boy in the plastic bubble, safe from the world but desperately alone. His entire life was a search for a better bubble. He found one in Hollywood. He found another in Scientology. Both promised eternity and demanded total submission. Now in the twilight, the bubbles have burst. His legacy is a paradox, an icon of movement, frozen in time. The whispers of a new love interest are just noise, the last attempts of a dying fire to find new fuel. Pause. The final verdict is not tragedy. It is emptiness. An empire of fame and fortune, bequeathed to no one, with nothing inside but the faint, melancholic echo of a disco beat.